The snowstorm came without warning. The wind howled through empty alleys, whipping flurries of snow into the air, as if trying to erase all boundaries between streets, rooftops, and sky. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. Traffic lights still blinked red and green, but for no one. Windows were shut tight. Doorsteps buried deep in snow, and the only sound that remained was the wind whistling through cracks in old bricks. In that blinding whiteness on a frost-covered stone bench in the park sat a small girl curled up. She wasn't crying, wasn't shivering, didn't move, just sat there like a ghost forgotten by time. Her eyes were wide open, deep as though they had seen something far beyond what a 5-year-old should ever have to see. In her arms was an old teddy bear named Buttons, its fur worn, one eye missing, and a heart scrawled on its chest in pink marker. She held it so tightly, it was as if it were the last thing she could still cling to in this world. No one saw her. No one stopped. The storm had pushed everyone behind closed doors. Everyone except one man and his dog, quietly crossing through the storm, not out of duty but for something deeper that even they could not yet name. When the town was at its quietest, when faith seemed frozen alongside the snow, a small hope was still sitting there, waiting for something, or someone, warm enough to reach it. The dog would be the first to sense it, and the man would be the one who wouldn't turn away this time. Their names were Rex and David, and this was the night everything changed. David was used to snowy nights. He had long since lost count of the times he'd driven through the freezing cold down the desolate streets that felt like the graveyards of this town. But there was one thing he would never get used to. The silence beside the empty back seat, where 5 years ago his daughter should have been sitting. Lily. That name still rested inside David's chest, like a small stone, cold and heavy. He didn't speak. It didn't touch it. But it was always there. Like the snow, like the loss. The cruiser slowed as wind gusted sideways across the windshield. David wore his police uniform with the care of someone donning armor. Every crease was precise, not for appearance's sake, but out of the habit of a man who needed something to control in a world that was anything but. What he couldn't control were the memories that rose every time the snow fell. Beside him sat Rex, a German Shepherd canine, his dark fur tinged with rust ears, always tuned to things David couldn't name. Rex needed no commands. He could sense the air, sense the shift in tone, even the times when David inhaled deeply, but never let it out in words. Rex had once been injured in a warehouse fire, a thin scar cut across his left ear. But what truly set Rex apart wasn't the scar. It was his gaze aged deep and sorrowful, like a soul that had once lost someone. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. Unit 17 report an emergency call near Northridge Park. Civilian reported what appears to be a child sitting alone on a bench. Heavy snow, low visibility. Caller wasn't sure, and has left the scene. David tightened his grip on the steering wheel. One heartbeat skipped. Any other details? Age clothing none. Too cold to wait. Just said it. Didn't feel right. He didn't respond immediately, just stared straight into the whiteness beyond the windshield, as if the snow out there was hiding an answer he didn't dare speak aloud. Copy, David said. Then released the mic. No further words. In that moment, Rex suddenly sat up. His ears pricked, eyes fixed forward as if in the heart of the blizzard he had just heard a voiceless call. David turned the car toward the park. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just a man turning into memory. Inside the vehicle, the air was thick. David said nothing. Rex didn't need words. They only knew that tonight would be unlike any other night before. Northridge Park was usually filled with the sound of children laughing, the hum of bicycle wheels rolling over gravel paths, and the scent of baked goods drifting over from the cafe across the street. But tonight, all of it had been swallowed beneath a thick layer of snow and bone-deep cold. Not a single soul, not a single sound. David turned off the engine, sat still for a few more seconds as if listening to the silence itself. He opened the door, wind rushed in, slapping his face like a lash of ice. He gave a soft signal. "Rex, let's go." Rex leapt from the car, body low, but ears perked. His fur was immediately coated in snowflakes, but his eyes never left the path ahead. David grabbed his flashlight, its beam sweeping across the stone-paved trail, now completely buried. Man and dog moved silently into the park, as if stepping into a black and white fairy tale, where all colors had been stripped away, leaving only pale light and tree shadows like skeletal limbs. The snow fell so thick there wasn't a single footprint. The wind howled through the flickering lampposts, creating a sound that felt like loneliness itself. Then Rex stopped. No barking, no rushing forward. He simply froze, his entire body drawn taut like a bowstring, eyes locked on a single point in the space ahead. David immediately switched off the flashlight. He trusted Rex more than his own instincts. And then he saw her. Under a dim street lamp, nearly half buried in snow, a small figure sat motionless on a wooden bench. Her head was bowed, hair matted from frost, and in her hands, a torn teddy bear clutched like the last treasure left in the world. David moved slowly, his heart beat louder than the howling wind. The flashlight beam touched her face, pale, almost translucent lips, blue eyelids dusted with frost. "Little girl," he called softly, voice nearly lost in his throat. No response. He knelt, hand reaching slowly for the emergency blanket in his back pouch. Rex didn't move, standing right beside the bench, his warm breath brushing the girl's legs, a silent vow. David placed a hand on her shoulder. Her skin was stiff beneath the layers. But she was breathing, slow, weak, but still. He cradled her gently, as if even the slightest pressure might shatter her. Her tiny hand still clung tightly to the bear, named Buttons, as though letting go would cause the whole world to collapse. "We're here now," David whispered, eyes stinging. "Don't let go. Don't leave." And in the heart of a raging storm, when the entire town had turned its back, a man and a dog knelt before that fragile life and did not walk away. The girl was too light. So light, it hurt David. It felt as though he wasn't carrying a child, but cradling a fragile remnant of life itself. He wrapped her tightly in the emergency blanket, then added his own scarf and jacket. The police uniform no longer stood as a symbol of law. It had become a shield against snow and wind, protecting a delicate little life. Rex ran ahead, without being called, without a command. His paw prints in the snow became the path, the compass. The wind lashed snowflakes into their faces, but Rex surged forward, as if his whole heart was dragging the girl back into the world. "Hang on, kid. Come on now," David whispered, his breath turning to mist before him. "I'm not letting you go." The wind struck sideways. Snow pelted his eyes. From a distance, the patrol car slowly emerged, its headlights glowing like the last flicker of hope left in the night. David held her tighter, his arms numb. But he didn't stop, didn't slow down, didn't think. Only one thought remained in his mind. Last time I lost Lily. But this time, no. The car door opened, and warmth began to return. David laid the girl gently onto the back seat, resting her head on his jacket, wrapping her neck in a scarf. He tore off his gloves, pressing his bare hand against her cheek. still cold, but still breathing faint, yet present. Rex leapt into the car, curled up beside the girl's legs, and rested his head on the stuffed bear buttons, as if resting it on the very heart of her fragile being. David shut the door and climbed into the driver's seat, soaking wet hands trembling from both cold and fear. The key turned. The engine roared to life like thunder being roused. "We're not losing her," he said, not knowing if he was speaking to Rex, to himself, or to God. Outside, the snow still fell like punishment, but inside the vehicle, 3 souls, a man who had known loss, a loyal dog, and a little girl fighting for life, were racing through the dark night. They didn't know that somewhere else a mother had just awakened from an accident, screaming her daughter's name beneath the white light of a hospital room. And fate, once again, was quietly stitching broken pieces back together with snowstorms, with heartbeats, and with hope. St. Adelaide's Hospital, in the middle of a winter night, was as silent as the town beyond its walls. Under stark fluorescent lights, the emergency room was eerily quiet. Only the soft beeping of a heart monitor echoed like the weary ticking of an old clock. Sarah Ellis lay motionless on the hospital bed, her face pale hair tangled and soaked with sweat and melted snow. A long scratch stretched down her cheek. White bandages wrapped around her forehead and chest. The nurse who had been checking the monitors froze as she saw Sarah's eyelids flutter open. Her gaze at first was hazy empty, but then fear awakened. "Emily, where's my daughter?" Her voice broke into a gasp. "You were in an accident," the nurse said gently. "You're in the hospital. Where's Emily?" Sarah shot upright, despite the pain from fractured ribs that made her clench her teeth. "My little girl. I told her to stay put. I just went back to get my phone. And then I drove off trying to find her. I can't lose her." The words poured out like a flood. No periods, no breath. It wasn't a story. It was remorse made audible. "You said the girl's name was what?" came a calm, deep voice from the end of the hallway. Claire Carter, the ER doctor, stepped in, medical folder in hand, the hem of her trousers still dusted with unmelted snow. Emily, Sarah sobbed, her eyes shattering. "She's 5. She has this old teddy bear named Buttons. If someone found her, she wouldn't let go of that bear." Claire glanced at the file she'd just received, then turned to the nurse, frozen by the bedside. A girl was found in Northridge Park, unresponsive, severely hypothermic, clutching a teddy bear. "She's in the recovery unit." Sarah went still. Then she wept, soundlessly, not out of guilt, but from a relief so raw it hurt. Outside, the cruiser sat parked beneath the emergency room canopy. David was walking, and the little girl cradled in his arms, stepping into the blinding hallway lights. Rex walked beside him, eyes watchful, as if guarding a treasure. And just a few doors away, a family waited to be reunited, and a man was about to reclaim what he had once lost. The ER doors burst open, sweeping in a gust of freezing wind into the blinding white hallway. David stepped inside, still carrying the little girl wrapped in fragile breaths. Melted snow dripped from his coat, pattering onto the floor in small, steady drops. Rex padded silently at his side, paws caked with ice and snow, eyes scanning for anything out of place. The hallway froze in that moment, as if time had paused for this image: a man, a dog, and a nearly frozen child stepping in, like something out of a snowbound fairy tale, blown off course into the real world. "Code pediatric," David said hoarsely. "Northridge Park. Female child. About 5 years old. Hypothermia. Still has a pulse." A young nurse jumped to her feet, fumbling with her gloves, as she called in the alert for the emergency response team. But before she could direct David toward the triage area, A familiar female voice called from the far end of the hall. "Where's the child, Claire?" Carter, chief ER physician, composed her name tag. Swaying slightly beneath her white coat, stepped forward. The fluorescent light skimmed across her face, stern, sharp, but her eyes held something unnamed. David turned. Their eyes met. 5 years of ruin passed in a single glance. Claire stood still, expression unreadable. David said nothing. Everything shattered in silence. The last time they had seen each other was outside the morgue when Lily's body hadn't yet been found, and apologies were buried under meters of snow. Claire. David said just the name, as if that one word had grown too heavy from being buried too long. Claire swallowed something down, then walked forward. Her eyes landed on the pale face of the girl in her brother's arms. She stepped close, touched the child's forehead, then spoke quickly. Triage room 2. Follow me. No blame. No questions. Only 2 people who had once shared blood, once shared loss, and now shared the duty of saving another life. Inside the recovery room, everything unfolded like a silent play. David laid the girl on the bed. Claire checked her pulse, examined her pupils, called for fluids and a nurse. Rex curled up in a corner, eyes locked on the girl, his body upright like a shield that needed no command. David stood nearby, hands clenched, gaze heavy, not from the cold, but from something awakening inside him, the past regret and a strange longing to be trusted again. Claire didn't mention Lily, didn't bring up that night years ago. She just worked decisive, steady, as if saving this child were the only way to salvage what was still left inside herself. After a while, she asked softly, "What's her name?" David pulled a crumpled slip of paper from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "Emily Ellis. There's a phone number, but I couldn't reach anyone. No address." Claire glanced at it, then froze. "Ellis, yeah. We just admitted a patient named Sarah Ellis. Car crash near Route 5, no ID. But she woke up calling her daughter's name. She said Emily." Nothing more needed to be said. They both understood. David gave a small nod. Claire clutched the paper, then looked back at the child. "That's her mother. It has to be." Beneath the white lights and the steady beep of monitors, silence returned. But this time, it wasn't punishing. It was the silence of people beginning to believe again in something they had once lost a miracle. David said little. Claire didn't ask more, but as he turned toward the door, she called out softly. "David." He stopped. "You did the right thing," Claire whispered. "You didn't give up." David didn't turn around, but his shoulders trembled just once. Room 213 was completely silent, eerily quiet for a hospital. No footsteps from doctors, no squeaky wheels of gurneys, not even the weary groans of other patients. Only one sound broke the stillness, beep, beep. Steady and fragile, like the heartbeat of a life being held on by nothing but faith and unspoken love. Emily lay there so small, her face pale beneath the dim light. Color had just started to return to her cheeks. Her tiny fingers still clutched the old teddy bear buttons, like the only lifeline left in the cold ocean of sleep. Rex lay at the corner of the bed, head resting just beside the mattress edge, his eyes never once leaving the little girl. Even with light bouncing off his pupils, nurses passing by, monitors beeping, Rex stayed unmoving, unwavering, as if his breath was tied to her heartbeat. And then, something happened. Her eyelids fluttered. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just the softest movement like a breeze brushing through a still forest. but enough to shift the whole world. Emily slowly opened her eyes. Very slowly, very gently. The light made her squint. Then she turned her head, not to look at the ceiling, not to search for her mother, not for the doctor, but to look straight at the quiet dog beside her bed. Her voice was so soft, it nearly dissolved into the sound of the monitor. "Where's the doggy?" Rex sprang to his feet. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stood, placing his 2 front paws gently on the bed, as if stepping into her world through the door of his own heart. Emily smiled, her first smile since being found faint but full of life. "I missed you," she whispered. "You're warmer than the blankets." She reached out her tiny hand, resting it lightly on Rex's head. And in that moment, the lights, the machines, even the snow outside, all seemed to pause. David stood at the doorway. He didn't come in, just stood there, watching. He saw her touch Rex like touching a miracle. He saw her eyes flicker like a small candle being relit in the middle of winter, and he couldn't hold it in. "She didn't ask for her mother," David said quietly, unsure who he was speaking to. "She asked for the dog." Claire arrived, stopping beside him. She too looked inside. Saw Rex rest his head in Emily's hand. Saw the girl whisper something into his ear, like a secret meant for no one else. "Maybe the dog was the first one who made her feel safe," Claire replied, barely audible. David didn't respond. His throat tightened. His eyes rested on Buttons, that ragged, worn teddy bear, wedged between a small arm and Rex's neck. 2 beings, one a toy, one a soul, both guarding Emily like silent sentinels. "She looks like Lily," David said, even though he hadn't meant to. Claire heard. Her hand rested gently on David's shoulder, not as a doctor, not as a colleague, but as someone who had once walked through the same loss. "I know," she said. The wind outside had begun to calm, but inside that room, a fire had just been lit. Not by machines, not by medicine, but by the gaze of a dog, and a warmth no blanket could ever replace. Room 218, just a few steps from Emily's, was where Sarah Ellis, the mother, was waking up minute by minute, second by second, consumed by one pain that burned through all the others. "Where is my daughter?" Sarah sat up in the hospital bed, pale-faced, her forehead bandaged, Doy's IV line in her arm, chest wrapped in pristine white gauze. But her eyes, they had not dimmed. On the contrary, they burned bright with fragile hope and absolute fear. She didn't care about the pain, didn't care about the accident. She only repeated one name again and again. "Emily. She's 5. She has the teddy bear named Buttons. I left her alone. I don't deserve to be her mother." David stepped in, no longer in uniform, just a man who had once lost a child and now carried the answer this mother didn't dare hope for. Rex walked beside him, quiet as a healed memory. Sarah looked up. Her eyes met David's. The man who had carried Emily through the storm, who had wrapped his coat around her, who had pulled her from the white inferno. It's you," she breathed, eyes welling. "You're the one who found her, aren't you?" David gave a slow nod. "Rex led me there." Sarah covered her face with both hands, sobbing soundlessly. But before the tears could even fall, the door burst open once more, and a voice broke into the air. "Mom." Emily ran in, draped in a hospital gown, bare feet tapping across the cold floor. Buttons clutched tightly at her side. She launched herself at the woman in the bed, and Sarah opened her arms wide, as if letting go would shatter the world. They collapsed into each other. No sentence fully spoken, just tears, sobs trembling fingers, brushing over faces, hair small hands. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Baby." Sarah choked. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere, again." I knew that Emily whispered, lips still faintly blue, but eyes shining bright. I had buttons. I had the doggy. Rex stepped forward, not breaking the moment, just gently resting his head on the edge of the bed. Eyes locked on Emily, as if to say, "I kept my promise. I brought you home." Sarah bent forward, softly touching the dog's head, tears spilling freely. "Thank you. Thank you so much for not leaving her behind." Outside, David and Claire stood silently in the hallway. They didn't speak. They simply watched through the cracked door where life was being stitched back together, where motherhood hadn't been severed by the storm, where a miracle had taken form in flesh and breath. "Do you want to go in?" Claire asked gently. David shook his head. "They need this moment. They don't need witnesses." Claire nodded, but something in her eyes, something heavy, had finally lifted. David looked at Rex. Saw him sitting there, still quiet, still never asking to be seen, only needing to be present. And David understood salvation doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with presence. Inside the room, Emily whispered into her mother's ear, "I told him he's mine. Now you know he found me before, even the light did." Sarah smiled through her tears, and as Rex tilted his head toward the girl, his eyes softening, a small family, imperfect but whole, had found each other again, in the heart of a white storm. 1 week after the storm, the snow on the sidewalks had started to melt, white-gray patches pushed to the roadside like faded memories of a nightmare. But in the hearts of those who had lived through that night, something hadn't melted. Something had only grown stronger. Faith. David sat in his small kitchen, an old flannel shirt draped loosely over his shoulders, a steaming cup of coffee resting on the scratched wooden table. The pale morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the refrigerator in the corner, where a photo of his daughter Lily at 4 years old was pinned. Her smile used to warm the kitchen every morning, until everything was swallowed by white 5 years ago. Rex lay under the table, his head resting on David's shoe tail, gently tapping like a living metronome. Then a soft knock on the door. David opened it, and he didn't get the chance to say a word before he saw Emily standing there. Buttons tucked under her left arm, right hand hidden behind her back. A rainbow-striped knit hat drooping over most of her forehead. Sarah stood beside her, still carrying traces of fatigue, but her eyes alive again. Not with confidence, but with the courage of a mother who had decided she would never let go again. "Hi, Officer David," Emily smiled. "I brought something for you." She pulled her hand out and handed him a slightly crumpled white sheet, flattened long ago in a coat pocket. Drawn in clumsy, colorful marker strokes was a picture. A man in a uniform holding a flashlight, standing next to a big dog with upright ears, and beside them, a little girl hugging a teddy bear in the snow. At the top, in wobbly kid handwriting, "My hero, Officer David and Rex." David stared at the drawing for a long moment. His hand trembled slightly. His heart sank with that quiet ache of touching a sacred memory he hadn't dared name in years. "I really liked your flashlight," Emily whispered. "It made the snow light up. Like magic." David knelt on one knee, holding the picture with both hands, as if afraid a gust of wind might blow it away. "You're the hero, kiddo," he said, voice gravelly. "You didn't let go." Emily rested her head against Rex's chest, giggling. "Rex says I'm the bravest person he's ever met." Rex didn't bark. He simply tilted his head, then placed his nose gently into the small open palm of the girl. A soft touch, deeper than 1,000 promises. Sarah stepped forward, voice uncertain. "We've been placed at the temporary housing unit near West Hill. It's nothing fancy, but it's a new start." David nodded. "Good. That's close to the community center." Sarah looked down at Emily. If you ever have time, she might want to visit Rex. She talks about him constantly." David glanced at Rex, then back at the little girl. "I think Rex misses her too." Emily beamed. A real smile. A full one, the kind no one can force out of a child who's once been lost in the snow. After they left, David stepped back into the house. He pinned the drawing to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a deer one Lily had made in kindergarten craft class. And in that moment, the old kitchen didn't feel cold anymore. It had Emily's voice, Rex's breath, Lily's faint smile, and the fragile light of something called hope. Tuesday afternoon. David stood before the faded blue door of the town's community center, a place where locals often came to request food assistance. Join Tai Chi sessions, or simply find a room with heating. But today, the place wore a new role, hosting the first session of a program called After the Storm, a trauma support group for children co-founded by the police department and the Children's Psychological Clinic. David didn't like groups. He didn't like circles folding chairs, or the question, "How are you feeling today?" He'd always been the silent type, a doer, not a talker. But Rex was the reason he showed up. In the wide room, 7 chairs were arranged in a circle, each one a small universe holding a story not yet spoken. Timmy, 6, his leg still bandaged from a house fire. He curled into his hoodie eyes, fixed on the floor. Grace, 10, hadn't spoken a word since the car accident that led to her parents' divorce. Her gaze was like glass, covered in dust, reflecting nothing. Mariah, 8, never took off her hood even indoors. No one knew what had made her hate the light so much. And then, Rex entered. No introduction, no name tag. He simply walked in slow, soft steps, as if afraid he might break something fragile inside that quiet room. Timmy was the first to look up. He blinked, then smiled a moment the center's staff hadn't witnessed in over 2 months. Grace's eyes lifted. She blinked quickly, as if the light in Rex's eyes had caused the dust to finally fall away. Mariah stretched her hand out from beneath her sleeve, then pulled it back, then extended it again, a silent battle, just to touch the warmth of that fur. David took a seat in one of the empty chairs. He said nothing, just watched Rex do what no therapist, no treatment plan had managed to do in the first 10 minutes, connect. The facilitator turned to David. "Would you like to share something?" David hesitated. Then he looked at Rex. Then at Timmy, who was now smiling, gently tugging on the dog's ear like it was sculpting clay. "Lost my daughter," David said slowly. 5 years ago. In a storm." The room went still. I've never talked about it. Not once. But then there was another child. A little girl, also in a storm. And this time, I wasn't too late. Timmy looked up. Grace sat straighter. Mariah laid her hand on Rex's back. Her first real-world touch in months. "I didn't come here as a cop," David added, eyes landing on the small arms, now wrapped around Rex's neck. "I came here to say, sometimes heroes don't carry guns. They don't wear uniforms. They have 4 legs, and they never leave, even when you say nothing." Rex nuzzled into Grace's lap. She didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered like melting snow. And in that room, full of unseen cracks and quiet wounds, a dog had walked through them all gently, without demand. David didn't know if he was leading a therapy session, but through his silence and Rex's presence, a door had just opened. 3 days after the first group session. This afternoon, there was no snow, but the wind still sliced like a blade. The sun had set earlier than usual, and the community center glowed with a stretch of amber light across its long hallway. It wasn't a frightening quiet, but the quiet of recovery, slow but real. Claire Carter stepped in, wrapped in a deep brown coat, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. In her hands was a paper bag, inside a first aid kit, a few boxes of oat biscuits, and a gray wool scarf she'd knitted during a sleepless night. She hadn't planned to stay long, just came to offer medical support, as she often called it, to make it easier to breathe. But then she saw David. He was crouched in the center of the room, surrounded by children, whose stories had yet to be named, Grace drawing by the window, Mariah, who had just taken off her hood for the first time, and Timmy holding Rex like a bedtime pillow. David was telling a story, not a fairy tale, but something true. That night, Rex stopped in front of a frozen bench. So cold, I thought nothing could have survived. But something did. A little girl. And the only thing still warm was her breath. No one interrupted. No one spoke. Even passing nurses paused, because in the center of that circle, a man was using his wound to do something he'd never dared before, open up. Claire leaned against the doorframe. It had been a long time since she'd looked at her brother like this, not as the man who ran away, not as the closed-off cop, but as a man learning to stand again, still hurt, but no longer alone. Rex looked up. He saw Claire. His tail wagged gently. No bark. Just a gaze. Understanding. Then he lowered his head again, allowing a little girl to place a handmade scarf around his neck. After the session, Claire approached as David was gathering up crayon drawings from the table drawings of Rex flashlight beams, snowflakes, and smiling faces, crooked but radiant. "You tell a good story," Claire said softly. David smiled a rare smile, unfamiliar on his face. "Maybe because I lived it." Claire looked at him, eyes softening. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't have to be here, but you chose to be." David looked down at Rex, now half asleep, his head resting on top of 3 crayon-drawn teddy bears. Rex chose first. I just followed. They stood there, not as doctor and officer, not as 2 people carrying guilt, but as a sister and a brother who had finally turned to face one another. "Claire," David began, voice low. She looked up. "I'm sorry for disappearing that night, for not letting you say anything." Claire squeezed his shoulder gently. "I don't need your apology. I just need you to keep going, and I think you're doing that now." They didn't hug. They didn't have to. Forgiveness isn't in the words. Forgiveness is 2 people choosing to stand in the same room beside the same dog and among the children who need them both. Spring didn't arrive with birdsong or blooming petals. It came with small puddles spreading across the sidewalk, with patches of snow shrinking in the shadows, and with soft morning sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, where David and Rex still began their days, with a hot cup of coffee and an extra biscuit for someone with 4 legs. Emily's drawing My Hero Officer. David and Rex still hung on the fridge door, right beside a deer-shaped clay magnet Lily had once made in kindergarten. An old world and a new one now coexisted on that cold metal door. And somehow they no longer clashed. That afternoon, a familiar knock echoed at the door. David opened it. And like a replayed scene, Emily stood there. Rainbow beanie still too big for her head. Buttons cradled in her left arm. But this time, her right hand held something new. Sarah stood behind her, looking more at peace than ever before. "I made this during art time yesterday," Emily said brightly. For you and Rex. She held up a small wooden frame. Inside was a new drawing. No more snow, a house with a wooden porch, a dog lying peacefully at the doorstep, and a man sitting on the steps holding a coffee mug. On the roof, written in green crayon, "Sometimes home is the place you return to, no matter how lost you were." David received the drawing like someone receiving a heartbeat after silence. Rex stepped out of the house, walking over to Emily, and bowed his head, as if to say, "Hello again, my little princess." Emily wrapped her arms around Rex's neck, pressing her face into his fur. "Told you. You're mine. You found me before. Even the light did." Sarah looked at David. "We're doing okay now. That little house in West Hill has laughter again. But she still asks about you and Rex every night." David smiled. "Then, any day works. Rex doesn't keep a busy schedule." A few days later, during the 6th group session at the community center, David sat with the kids as usual. Grace now spoke in full sentences. Mariah had begun laughing out loud. Timmy was no longer afraid of the dark because Rex can see in the night, he'd said. And something quietly miraculous had happened. The kids stopped drawing snow. They drew light. Flashlights, wildflowers, teddy bears standing beside dogs, and skies that were no longer white and empty. Claire still dropped by every week carrying warm muffins and a first aid kit like a ritual. One day, David asked her, "Where do you think we start over?" Claire thought for a moment, then answered, "Maybe where there are children-loyal dogs and people who were once broken but chose to hold themselves together with love." David nodded. "Then I'm exactly where I need to be." That night, David sat on the porch. Rex lay beside him, head resting on David's leg. Above the doorway, Emily's new drawing hung framed. A gentle breeze passed by. Not cold, not threatening. Just breeze. In the distance, a child's laughter drifted through the wind, melting into the moonlight. David closed his eyes, and in that darkness, he heard the things light doesn't always reveal: breath, love, and life returning softly, slowly, just enough for someone to begin again. A 5-year-old girl with a torn teddy bear, a dog with a heart that doesn't know how to give up, and a man who once lost everything. They found each other not through some dazzling magic, but through the quiet patience of the heart and the courage to rise again when there's nothing left to hold on to. Some miracles don't come with blinding light. Sometimes it's just a wet nose pressed into your hand when you're too cold to even shiver. And maybe God still sends angels to earth. It's just that sometimes they have 4 legs and a wagging tail. The end isn't a goodbye. It's a beginning. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Someone out there might be waiting for a small spark of light in the middle of their own storm. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I believe in 4-legged miracles. And if you were ever saved by love, tell your story. Because together we are still writing miracles.